Double Game Week 36 captaincy is one of the very few remaining opportunities to gain ground this season. It does mainly come down to fixtures versus expected minutes, so what we're going to do is analyse the data and weigh up the best option. First up on the shortlist this game week are Mitoma and McAllister, the Brighton midfield duo. They're up against Arsenal away and Newcastle away. They are difficult fixtures, but only two teams double this game week. It's Brighton and Newcastle. The last player on the shortlist is from Newcastle. It's Isak against Leeds away and Brighton at home. Whilst he's got easier fixtures, he's got much lower expected minutes, and that's something that we're going to take a look at later on in the video. We're going to have a look at how many minutes he'll probably play out of 180. I did consider including his teammate Wilson on the shortlist. The problem is, his expected minutes are even worse. I'd only consider captaining Wilson if we got leaked team news that Isak was benched and Wilson was starting. If it was guaranteed that Wilson played 180 minutes and Isak played 180 minutes as well, I would actually captain Wilson because of his penalty duty advantage, plus he's got better non-penalty underlying stats. The problem is it's not a perfect world and he'll probably play less. I couldn't include March in the Brighton midfield trio because he is injured at the minute. And lastly, for the honourable mentions, I don't captain defenders or players with one fixture in a double game week. The reason for this is because I prefer a higher ceiling, so you could get 180 minutes to get goals and assists, you could get up to 6 bonus points, up to 4 appearance points, and if you're a midfielder, you could get up to 2 clean sheet points as well. With that in mind, I would rather captain an attacking defender with 2 fixtures in the double, rather than an actual attacker with 1 fixture in the double. I wouldn't blame you for picking Trippier because he's got the highest floor this game week. He is attacking compared to other defenders, but he's not compared to the players on the shortlist. Let's kick things off with the non-penalty stats per 90 minutes for this season. Now, I would say McAllister's numbers are skewed. That's because the first part of the season he was playing in a deeper role, then he moved into an attacking mid role when Lallana got injured, but to be fair, more recently he's been playing in a slightly deeper role in midfield anyway. The other two players are neck and neck for non-penalty return points per 90 minutes. It is slightly more impressive for Isak. That's because he's a forward and he gets 4 points for a goal scored and Mitoma gets 5, so the weighting in that figure does go against him. It's the same in the calculation for the expected numbers as well, so he gets 4 for every expected goal, whilst Mitoma gets 5. As you can see on the screen, he has still got slightly more non-penalty expected return points per 90 minutes. Whilst McAllister's numbers are poor overall, when he plays in that attacking mid position, they're actually pretty good, and don't forget these are non-penalty numbers. He's the only player on the shortlist that's guaranteed penalty duties. With him being the dedicated penalty taker for Brighton, that obviously means Mitoma isn't. As for Isak, it is questionable because it does depend if Wilson's on the pitch. If Wilson's on the pitch, he'll definitely take it. If he's not, it will probably be Isak, but I'm not 100% sure about that one. McAllister benefits from more set pieces. He is the main man on direct free kicks, but to be fair, he doesn't take in direct free kicks or corners. Now let's take a look at the probability of each player scoring or assisting. These odds are based on the assumption that each player plays 180 minutes. We'll review the expected minutes later on in the video, and that mainly does apply to Isak, but of course it does apply to Mitoma and McAllister as well. Isak's got the highest anytime goal scorer odds, highest anytime assister odds, which of course means he's got the highest anytime return odds, but I need to reiterate that's if he plays both full matches. Something to consider is something I mentioned earlier, is that the Brighton midfielders do get an extra point per goal scored, which means that the weighted odds are slightly higher, but they don't compete with Isak's if they play the same number of minutes. It is tighter on the points projections. Isak comes out on top with 7.2 on Fantasy Football Scout, and the highest on Fantasy Football Fix is Mitoma with 6.9. Despite McAllister having the penalty duty advantage, I think his figures are lower because of the high risk of him playing in a deeper position. Whilst Isak doesn't come out on top on both websites, he has got the highest average overall with 6.9, that's whilst Mitoma's got 6.7. By comparing the opposition's defence, we can see how much easier Isak's fixtures are. Combining the defensive numbers of Arsenal and Newcastle, they only average 1 goal conceded per game, and they're only expected to concede slightly more than that. There's only Man City who's got a lower expected goals conceded figure than Newcastle and Arsenal in the whole league, and Newcastle have actually conceded the least amount of goals in the whole league as well. When it comes to Isak's opponents Leeds and Brighton, their defensive numbers are awful. They've conceded 1.7 goals per game, and they've still been expected to concede 1.5 goals per game as well. The combined probability of one of these defences or both of these defences obtaining a clean sheet this game week is only 27%. As for Brighton's opponents, it's practically 50-50 whether one or both of their opponents get a clean sheet this game week. I mentioned earlier that Newcastle have conceded the least amount of goals. It's actually Leeds who have conceded the most amount of goals in the whole league this season. There is another benefit for Isak that's not included on the screen. He's got the home advantage against Brighton. That's whilst the other two players have to travel away from home in both fixtures. Before we draw up a conclusion, we're going to carry out a quick risk assessment. All 3 players on the shortlist have had an ample amount of resting time with 6 recovery days. They all played 90 minutes in the last match. I'm quite surprised that Isak did, but that's promising. I'm not concerned about the fitness of any of these 3 players. However, if you look at the expected minutes, Isak is a rotation risk, and that is slightly concerning. If we get leaked team news and we find Isak starting in the first fixture, I would definitely captain him for the higher ceiling. If Wilson's starting alongside him, I would still captain him. That's because Wilson's more likely to get subbed off, and he's got lower expected minutes in that second match. If Wilson's starting and Isak isn't, I think Wilson would be the best captain this game week, but I don't think it's worth the free transfer. It would probably result in a hit. That's because we've got a double game week coming up and barely any free transfers left. Instead of risking 4 points, I think it's much safer to captain Matoma, who I think is the second best captain this game week. So based on all of that information, in almost all cases I would captain Isak. Unless we get the leaked team news that he's benched, then I'd captain Matoma. I've got a team selection video coming out soon. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. In fact, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these best captain videos either.